let's not just go back to office because we feel like we need to be back in the office, but what's the reason that we need to be together? And how do we shape our environment so that we're building off of that?
Welcome to Vibecast, the podcast that dives deep into the heartbeat of workplace culture. I'm your host, Kristi Skutvik. Join me in conversations with extraordinary leaders as we unravel their experiences, both positive and negative, that have impacted workplace culture. This podcast is more than storytelling. It's about actionable insights. Are you ready to transform the vibe at your workplace? Let's go. Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with Tony Bond. Tony is the Chief Innovation Officer at Great Place to Work. He has served as a trusted organization development advisor on a variety of projects, ranging from work with Fortune 100 firms to small and medium-sized enterprises. He leverages his extensive corporate leadership background and strong business acumen to help enterprises design and implement strategies that build on strengths and lead to sustainable results. In addition to his work on building high-performing work cultures, Tony has engaged in helping organizations embed sustainability as a core business strategy, balancing economic, social, and environmental considerations. Please listen in as Tony and I have a great conversation. Thank you for being here, for making time for me. I'm just super excited because your background and experience has just given you such an amazing, well, from what I can tell, I haven't heard the stories yet, but from what I can tell, such an amazing perspective on kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of workplace vibes, being the Chief Innovation Officer at Great Place to Work. Also, your experience, I'm sure, at Allstate kind of gave you some of that, like, hey, what are we going to do up here? Or, in my role here, based on my experiences over here, right? So I'm just excited to hear those stories, hear what's brought you to your journey today, what you're seeing in the marketplace, and just really hear more.
Thank you so much, Kristi. I'm excited to be with you. Looking forward to this conversation.
Excellent. Well, why don't we just get started and kind of ground the conversation so everybody can understand your definition of a vibe? Like, what does a vibe mean to you?
For me, it's more of an atmosphere. It's funny, when I go into different workplaces, you can almost pick up on the vibe right away. And so, you have the physical space, you have the work that people are doing. But for me, the vibe is sort of the work, the atmosphere, the mood, the energy that comes from people having, let's just say, a great place to work. And so you created this atmosphere where people are very collaborative, they feel inspired, and that actually ends up being the vibe in that organization. So it's the energy, it's the atmosphere, it's the mood of the work environment.
So true. And like anywhere you go, right? So the workplace or, Starbucks or McDonald's or In-N-Out or wherever, Nordstrom, right? There's like a certain energy created. I totally agree. And you can feel it.
I might add that it's can be negative or it can be positive or negative. So the vibe in a not so great workplace experience, you can pick up on that as well pretty quickly.
Totally. And that's something I want to go into a little bit later. Your background, you've had some certifications and degrees in positive organizational change. And I picked up on that because I really want to dig in there a little bit on, what that means and how that's different than just a certification or an experience or a degree in just organizational change. Because I think that seemed very specific to me and stood out to me. So maybe that's a great next question for you is like, what is that all about? What came through in that experience of getting those degrees and certifications around that word positive?
Yeah, the positive is really important. I think it's, when you think in terms of organizational change, there's a lot of different ways you can approach it. If you approach it from a positive organizational change perspective, then it always starts with what's working well. And you find those things, that gives you the energy. Because if you think about change, and our physical body, if we see a threat, it's almost enacting your parasympathetic nervous system. So there's a problem, there's a threat, I'm not as creative, I'm a little bit on guard. And so if you approach it from a positive perspective, it activates your parasympathetic nervous system instead of sympathetic nervous system. And so I think that's David Cooper-Otter and some of the folks at Case Western Reserve is all about, it's grounded in positive psychology, but let's find the good first. Let's build off of what's working. And then that's our entry point into some of the problems that we want to address. And so let's appreciate what's working is the starting point.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's crazy how just like words or situations or conversations can lead to like a physical reaction, right? Like you're saying, you're sympathetic or you're parasympathetic. It's like that can really change the dynamic and the energy in a room or the energy moving forward in something. That's fascinating to me.
It could be as simple as saying, Kristi, we have a problem, or I have a problem to address versus there's an opportunity. And just the change of words can really put your body and your mind into a different state.
Yeah, it's almost like defense versus offense, right? So if there's a problem, you're like immediately in the defense mode, where if you're like, hey, I see an opportunity, you're like, okay, let's look at it. Let's think about it. What can we do about it?
Yeah. And if you're coaching a leader, it's like putting that leader into the ideal state. This is the very beginning phase. So it's kind of a dream state, ideal state. And then you can get to the real state and figure out where's the gap and how do you close the gap. But it's starting with a dream or an aspiration in the beginning.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so let's talk about real life examples, right? So we've talked a little bit about like theory, but tell me a little bit about like your journey, your story, how, experiences you had, whether it was you as a leader, you as a team member of an organization, and then you in your current role today where you're helping organizations, both probably internally and externally, create that energy and those vibes. And that transformation, if you will. So tell me a little bit just about your journey, how you got to where you're at today, and, tell us some stories.
I didn't really have any plans coming out of college. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I did well in school, but I was an athlete and my dream was to be a professional athlete. And someone said recently—
What sport did you play?
Basketball.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so athlete retires twice. The first time is when your career is over with, and then when you work, that's the second retirement. But it all started with, because of sports, someone knew me, brought me into the organization, Allstate. I didn't really have a place because I didn't really have work experience, but I was put on a rotational development program where I went to sales, marketing, accounting, IT. I got a chance to experience the whole organization before I found a home. And that home was in corporate finance. And so I had a number of years in corporate finance, and then I was trained and led other business units. But I feel like getting that exposure in the very beginning of my career to the overall organization and to leaders right off the bat helped me see an organization in maybe a different way than most people would have seen it. And so I had a chance to work with Allstate, very successful career. Around the pandemic, the recession, 2007, 2008, I always felt like I needed to do something different, but I wasn't sure what that was. And so I went back to school for the third time. That's when I went for this positive organizational development program at Case Western. And out of that, I got into more of a sustainability field of work. And so helping organizations create more sustainable ways of working, that can be environmentally speaking, it can be societal issues. So it's all around, today it would be considered ESG work. And so I did that for a period of time. And then someone that I knew from Case Western, who was a professor there and was helping me in this career, mentioned, the next wave of sustainability is really about people. And I tried to figure out, what does that really mean? And so then I just, came across a Great Place to Work. And I'm like, that's it. That's the company that's focused on the people side of sustainability. And I started working with Great Place to Work. And it's 12 years now. I'm 12 years in. I had no idea it would be 12 years, but it's probably been the best way for me to kind of, maybe not end my career, but the best way for me to kind of reach a climax in my career is to be at Great Place to Work.
So let me ask you this. How did you know it was time for something more at Allstate?
I think I'm wired to ask a lot of questions. I'm somewhat innovative just by the nature of who I am. And if you know the field of insurance, I was spending my time figuring out, in a lot of cases, profitability, losses. So it was like a risk-averse conversation all the time. Let's prepare for what could go wrong. So I just felt like there was not a lot of room to grow creatively there. But also, I'm a 7 Enneagram. And so I just loved different things. And I had a long career that just felt right inside that maybe I need to do something different now.
Okay, so for those who are listening that don't know much about Enneagram, tell us like a snippet of what a 7 is and what that means.
The 7 is someone who probably brainstorms a lot, very, very creative in nature, maybe avoids pain by keeping things on the up all the time, being very positive. And so it's a positive person who is innovative in a way, creative, and likes change, likes different things. And so my undergrad is in psychology. And so I've taken probably every assessment that's under the sun. And so, yeah, everything comes out that way. But I also had a coach at that time. It was a life coach when I was at Allstate. And so this person kind of helped me blend career and life together for the very first time. And so it was more about how can I find more work that is more of an expression of who I am as a person. And I went on that search.
What a gift that is, right? Some people don't find that ever. There's some stats out there. In fact, I was just listening to another podcast earlier today that, 89% of people are in jobs that don't match their personality profile, which is wild, right? I mean, that's everyone. It's insane to me, and I can only imagine if somebody had, a coach or a mentor earlier on. I try to play this role to my kids of like, who are you and what best serves you and what your interests are and what your passions are, and how do you make a living out of that versus here's what you should do, right? The should conversation.
It's hard to answer the question, what do you want to do? Or I think that's a hard question for people to answer. And so for me, it was more about, becoming more familiar with who I am. And it was kind of a wayfinding exercise, just talking to as many people as I could, learning from them. And that sort of just put me on a pathway to figure out what career would make the most sense for me.
Was there any pivotal one or two questions that were asked from your coach or that you had to contemplate that really helped you understand your pivot point or where to go or where to focus or anything like that?
I remember questions like, when you go to the library, what are you picking up? What are you reading? What do you spend your time like researching? I also remember questions like, what do you feel like you can do better than nine out of 10 people? So it was just questions like that really, in addition to taking assessments, that got me more focused and gained more clarity. And then also, what gives you the most energy in the day? So I would keep like journals of all the things that I've done during the day and which one of those things gave me energy. It could be within a career, but there's certain tasks you have to do that gives you energy, and some take energy away. And so I was keeping an inventory of energy based on my daily activities, and all that helped me gain some clarity.
So now that you've been in a leadership role, how do you impart that or what do you do to keep the vibes high with your team based on what you've learned and what you know has worked for you? Like, what does that look like in an organization as you lead teams?
I think for all leaders, it's three things come to mind: listening. And sometimes we listen to react or respond versus, you probably heard, just listening to understand. So if you listen and be very curious and you learn people's stories, it's hard not to want to help people when you hear their stories. And so I think that's one of the biggest tools leaders can have is listening. Also, just know that what you do and what you say can either inspire people or not inspire them. So you want to be inspiring and create inspiration for people. And then last but not least is, how do you care for people? Because if you look at an individual in the workplace, they're really representing three personas. It's the individual, and then it's the professional, and you also have a member of society. So you have a person that have their own personal needs. You also have a professional that's trying to have a great career. And then you have someone who lives in a community and they want to do well in their community. So if we're not aware of those three parts of a person and we're not nurturing those three, then I think it takes away from the potential they can bring to their work and to life.
So do you have a particular story you can share where you maybe turned somebody around or maybe they were uninspired or didn't know who they were, and you as a leader, what the impact of that was to your team, perhaps. And then as you turned them around, what changed on your team?
We do a lot of client work. Can I share a story that's client related?
Of course. Yeah.
Which kind of shaped my thinking, but this was years ago, and I was working with an executive team. And part of the work that we were doing at the time is we called it executive alignment meetings. So we gather a lot of data. That's the magic that we have, is collecting data on the workplace. And then we share those insights back with the leadership team. And from that sharing of insights, the whole idea of how do we make change in our organizations that creates a more positive culture, but also drives business results. And so we were working with this one client, and it was right before Christmas, and I was doing an executive alignment meeting, and there was a C-suite and one level below, and everything was going well, I felt like, except for the perspective of the CEO, the very top person. And I think everyone in the meeting was looking at him to see how he responded to things. He was sort of remote. He was distant from the whole conversation. And so we closed, and he taps on my shoulder on the way out. It's like, I want to see you one-on-one, make an appointment. And I'm thinking, oh no, this is horrible. This meeting went wrong. But I met with him a couple weeks later. He sat down with me. He's like, I just want you to know, I went to an all-boys school, a private school. I lived in a neighborhood. I didn't have exposure to a lot of different people from me. I have an undergrad in engineering. I have an MBA. He's like, I really get, the whole conversation was around creating a great place to work for all and honoring differences and being inclusive. And he basically said, there's nothing in my background that has put me in a place where I can do what you're asking me to do. And I remembered 2 years ago seeing an article, I think it was titled Family Ghost in the Executive Suite, professor at MIT who wrote about how we were raised and how we're parented and how we grow up really influences how we lead. He was basically describing this to me. And then the final question was, what can you do to help me nudge in a small way to start to move towards what you're describing? And so we had a conversation on what that might look like. And here's someone who's leading, hundreds of thousands of people in your organization. And that's how they felt. And so it was an honor for him to disclose that to me. But it also helped me realize that, we all have our family ghosts and we lead based on how we are raised. And so I became more tolerant, or maybe not tolerant, but a more kind approach to leaders when they're not doing what they're asked to do, because there's so much behind that. So that's a story where I feel like hearing someone, listening to their story, giving them a little bit of things that they can do, those little small nudges, starts to move them in the right direction.
Wow, that's pretty incredible that he had the that own self-realization to put that together, right? It kind of shows his, I guess, high emotional IQ to know that he didn't have the tools or feel like he had the tools in order to do what he needed to do to align the team together. That's fascinating, one, and two, incredible self-awareness. So what did you start to see as you worked with that team as he started to shift? I mean, was there anything like a simple tactic that was really pivotal in his shift? And then what did you start to see with the team as he chose to shift?
Yeah, he started to ask more questions. He was more available. He started to ask more questions. He no longer felt like he had to have all the answers. And so I think that fear of reputational risk started to go away. He started to lean into other parts of his executive team who maybe were a little bit more oriented towards this than he was. And so it's almost like he felt like he didn't have to do it all himself. And so I think he was much more open. And people, in turn, were able to share more things with him, feel less threatened by bringing up things that maybe wouldn't go the way he would want to hear them. So I think it was just opening up the dialogue. And that's pretty much it. I think we survey a lot of employees around the globe. And if we did nothing other than just survey, I think we would be moving things, because it starts a different type of conversation. And people, in essence, move in the direction of the things they talk about. So I think for him, it was this being more open into a different kind of a conversation with people.
So is there one core value, either personally or professionally or within your organization, that kind of lives loudly within everything that you do, how you lead, how you serve others, that helps create that vibe, that energy that you bring to the table?
We have what we call the 10 ways to success at Great Place to Work. And one of them is one team, one mission, which really fosters collaboration, working together, enjoying each other. Our CEO often says that if any one thing is done at Great Place to Work, it's done by at least 40 other people. And so I think that's one thing. Growing up in sports, that's what you're all about, like the team. So I think that value of respecting each other, you can be disagreeable at times about the things that you're working on, but you never attack the people or the individuals. So I think, one team, one mission is a value that we hold near and dear. And I've seen it work well, no matter what setting you're in.
So what have you seen happen when somebody doesn't hold that true to their heart?
I think it stands out like a sore thumb. I mean, it really shows, because if you have that orientation overall, it's easy to spot that. But I think it's almost like the culture and the people almost take care of the situation themselves versus the leader having to deal with it. And so I think that's pretty much it. It creates an environment where we can hold each other accountable. We can share with that person that they're not living into those values. And it also makes them super uncomfortable. And in turn, it may not be the best fit for them. They may need to go somewhere else. And so I think it kind of self-corrects in a way.
In my HR consulting practice, I see this a lot. I mean, I find myself doing almost like, I'll call it a mediation. It's probably the wrong word, but really helping people articulate like why there's tension between them, or why a project is kind of off the rails. Or so I had a really interesting conversation the other day, and it was some behaviors were definitely sticking out and not true to the values and culture of the organization that these people worked for. Nor do I believe it was true to their own core personal values, right? But there was like these slight annoyances that kept popping up that created this barrier between the two of them to even be able to talk to each other. It was pretty wild. And so as we started just like uncovering and asking questions and talking through, and when you do this, it makes me feel X, it was the discovery and self-discovery that came with it. It was actually this enlightening situation where these two individuals ended up realizing they're probably more alike than they even care to admit. But when they get irritated, they like default to these childish behaviors that then create this energy that is just hard for people to be around. I mean, it's two people in a big team, and it creates tension among the whole office. It's just wild, how that can be. And without talking it out and being vulnerable, once they got to that place and were able to do that, it was pretty magical what could happen. And
yeah, there's so much growth that comes from that. And someone told me about a 10% rule. If there's a disagreement around anything, rather than seeing it as right or wrong, you really have to spend some time, like you did, figuring out what's the 10% of this whole argument that we can kind of find some common ground around.
Yeah, because it's like it's almost like the thought of like when you have little babies, and if they just sleep a little bit, then they'll sleep more. So if you can just find that 10% or that few hours of sleep, right, then you'll probably start to see 15% and 20%. It almost puts you in that like the right mindset and the right feeling in order to start to respect and appreciate the other person's perspective versus always deceiving yourself in believing that they have bad intentions.
I've heard no friction, no fire. It doesn't mean that you totally agree with everything that's being said. There needs to be some dissent, but you have to do it in a way where you're not attacking the person, but it's more about views on the work that you're doing.
So I'm so curious what you're seeing in the marketplace these days. We're post-pandemic. We've gone through a significant amount of workplace change. What I'm seeing is like still like a recalibration of like, do we go back to the office? Do we not go back to the office? People have a different way of working, a different way of thinking. Some concessions were made during the pandemic for how we work in different workplaces. So like, what have you been seeing as some kind of market trends for great places to work?
I think a lot of companies are either hybrid or coming back to the office much more than they were in the past. And there's some benefits from that. But I see the trends as let's not just go back to office because we feel like we need to be back in the office, but what's the reason that we need to be together? And how do we shape our environment so that we're building off of that? And it could be all over the place. We may want to rename certain rooms that we have in the building to reflect what we want to happen in these rooms. And so we're coming back for a reason. And I think you have to be very clear on why you need to come back. And what are you going back to? It's like, because things have changed so much, we're not going back to anything that used to be. So the trends I see is some combination of hybrid or a lot of going back to the office, but they're reimagining what it means to be in the office and what are the things we need to do together while we're there to make it productive.
And what do you think as like you kind of form your leadership over time, right? And the things that have kind of formed your opinion on how to lead, who to lead, et cetera. What's a tactic that you use to ensure that you get the right people on the team from the beginning? What does that look like to make sure that there's, a vibe fit and their energy is right for the team?
You have to be aligned around the mission and the overall objective of what work is about at this organization. So if you have a passion for the work and what we're trying to accomplish, that's probably the first thing that needs to be in place. I think there's a willingness to learn. So it's not necessarily that you have to have all of the experience prior to coming in. But if you are someone who is a quick learner and willing to learn, and you work really, really hard, we really have adopted Angela Duckworth's grit philosophy.
I love that book.
Yeah, and that's really aligns with me as well, because I know that when I came out of college, I was given an opportunity, and someone took a risk on me because they felt like that I could quickly learn things, even if I didn't have the background. And you work really hard and you're resilient. So those are the things you're looking for: a lifelong and a life-wide learner, someone who has grit, someone who has passion around your mission and what you're trying to accomplish, and someone who has resilience. They can bounce back from defeat or being let down. I think if you have all those things combined, it's a good fit for any team.
And then what other tactics can leaders use, kind of like the secret sauce, right, to maintain positive work vibes for a healthy and productive team culture? Like if you had to give a leader one piece of advice so that, that 1% that they can move the needle, that 10% they can move the needle tomorrow, later today, in the next week, what thing would you say, go do this now?
The one thing that came to mind was present. If you're totally present to the people that you're leading, that leads to building a strong relationship, hearing people's stories. I think all those things are super, super important, because if I go back to my sports days, before I even got to the college, the coach had met my family. They had met my mother. They had gotten to know me at a really deep level before I even started. And then there was always this checking in to see, how are you doing as a person? I say all of this because right now, the environment we work in, there's so many issues. There's geopolitical issues. There's war. There are concerns about technology and AI taking over jobs. And so people are stressed, and they are also challenged with well-being overall. And so we can't ignore that. And so I think a leader, if you can be totally present to people, if you can ask questions, if you can connect with them on a deep level, that's first and foremost, I think, maybe the tool that you want to use the most out of your toolkit.
Yeah, I love that, because I really think like the remote work environment and the technology, while we're the most connected in terms of technology, we're the most disconnected than we've ever been, right? The Surgeon General even came out with saying like loneliness is worse than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. Which is wild, right? And so you're right. People want to know that they're cared for and that they mean something. And it's so easy to connect like this over technology without asking the hard questions, or, asking like, hey, how's your day? How's your kid? You know? How was your family was in town? What'd you guys do? How was that? It's like we're so quick and back-to-back meetings to go straight into like the work and the details and the analytics and all of that versus like just being present. Not to mention the amount of distractions there are with technology, right?
Well, he do that. I mean, if I feel like you care about me, there's no doubt I'm going to give the extra effort in getting things done. So in the end, it drives performance as well, but it ties into those three things I mentioned: listening, being inspirational, caring for people. I talked to someone who's a young person, a millennial, and they just described the other day, I'm afraid that I won't have enough money for retirement. I don't even know if Social Security will be around when I retire. So it's all on me to save for retirement. I'm thinking about our kids' college education. They have like really young kids. So you can imagine this generation that makes up most of the workforce, millennials, and the pressure they feel to buy a home, to be able to do all the things they want to do, and the uncertainty about the future. There's no way you can just leave that at the door when you come to work. So I think leaders have to be aware of that.
Yeah, definitely. I was taught long ago that whatever you're feeling inside leaks out in every aspect of your life. So if you think that you can leave it at the door, you're sadly very wrong because it might not come out true to the words of what you're feeling, but it will come out in angst, anger, sadness, whatever, low productivity. You're going to take it out on your team, etc. And so it will come out.
We talk a lot about great place to work for all, and we have to make sure it's a great place to work for all. So the last thing I'll say for a leader is think in terms, is there anyone on my team who I think may not be having a great workplace experience? Because we want everyone to have a great workplace experience. And if so, then how am I connecting with that person and supporting them? So
awesome. Okay. I have a few things, a few questions just to get to know you, a little lightning round, if you will. So, what are three, 1 to 3 adjectives of how people describe you?
Kind, wise, funny.
Love it. And if you had to choose, would you choose the beach or the mountains?
Mountains. Probably because I'm not very good at swimming. So probably.
Do you like to ski? Like, do you like the cold mountains or do you like the summertime mountains?
No, I'd rather like hike.
Okay.
So whether it's desert mountains in Arizona or Blue Ridge Parkway, it would be more hiking in the mountains.
Okay. What's your favorite hike you've ever done?
Grand Canyon.
Okay. Tea or coffee?
Tea.
And do you like going to the theater or do you like, staying home and watching Netflix?
I'm a big concert goer. So I may hit three or so concerts a month. So yeah.
Wow, how cool! And what's the genre of concerts you like to go to?
I'm all over the place. I'm the youngest in my family. So my mother was big into country and Western. I had one brother who was big into rock. One was blues and jazz. One was R&B. And so I'm kind of all over the place. I would say Spotify rap at the end of the year put me more in like this dysfunctional category. But I like indie. I probably indie music is my favorite. Yeah.
Awesome. Any parting words that you'd like to share?
Well, first of all, thanks for doing this. I know that people listening to this, it's a gift that you're giving people because we all learn from other people's stories. But I would say, I'm fortunate to be in the role that I am with the company that I'm working with. It wasn't planned. It was kind of a serendipitous journey that I had. But I think building a network, getting to know people, being open to all different types of people, being curious, all those things combined really gets you to a really nice place.
And you can't be curious if you're not present. So like you were saying earlier, be present.
Be present. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Tony, for joining me and for sharing your wisdom. I would second that thought on an adjective of you being wise, because I think you've shared a lot of really insightful things with us today. So thank you for that. I appreciate you, your time, the great work that you're doing. And yeah, just really thank you. I love how Tony defines a vibe. It's the energy, atmosphere, and mood of the work environment, something you can just feel. It was also fascinating to talk through the word positive and how just a small word and posture and language can evoke a nervous system response. Interesting how he also shared his journey from a rotational program at Allstate to his current role at Great Place to Work. The three things he highlights are similar to keeping the main thing the main thing: the importance of listening, inspiring, and caring for people as a leader. That last one just really gets to me. I think we lose sight of that all too much and go straight to talking about work. In addition, he talked about a leader who had a self-realization, and man, do I love people who self-reflect and come to their own conclusion of something that needs to change. It was awesome to hear about the shift in his leadership style, leading to more open dialogue and collaboration within this leader's team. I also got Tony's insight on market trends for great places to work, such as hybrid work models and reimagining the office environment. So important to think through why you're bringing people to the office and what's the reason people need to be together. If you only take away one thing, it's be present. It seems so simple and has benefits beyond measure, but yet in such a distracted world seems to become an afterthought. Try it this week and see what happens. Keep vibing, my friends. If this episode inspired you and you want to see how you can take the next step to creating a better vibe within your organization, I'd love for you to download our complimentary 75 Vibes worksheet. This is a simple tool to create a habit and mindset around creating great vibes in work and life. The best part, it's simple and it works.